So first of all, we're going to define what ARIA is, and then we're going to talk about how it works, and then we're going to talk about the components slash features of it, and then we're going to talk about the support of ARIA, and then we're going to talk about the common ARIA attributes that are most commonly known and used. Then we're going to go into how to use ARIA correctly by giving some just really basic examples. Then we're going to talk about how you can use ARIA incorrectly so that way you can avoid this for sure. And then we're going to conclude with an ARIA summary where we will discuss 5 key points that we would like you to take away. Next slide. So what is Y-ARIA? Y-ARIA stands for Web Accessibility Initiative hyphen accessible rich internet applications. Y-ARIA is commonly referred to as just ARIA. For the purposes of this presentation from now on, that's what we will refer to it as. ARIA is a suite, is a suite of standards. Sorry. ARIA is a suite of standards developed by the Web Accessibility. So I have to turn up the sound. For all you who are on Zoom, because of my blindness, I use a screen reader software program, and that's why I'm using to hear my notes so that as I talk about them. So I do apologize. I had to turn up the sound. Okay, so they are the standards developed by the Web Accessibility Initiative of the World Wide Web Consortium, also known as the WC3. The purpose of ARIA is to allow developers of dynamic script-driven web applications to provide information about the interface elements in these applications to assistive technologies. Assistive technology commonly used by people with disabilities. Basically, ARIA allows web developers to define how their custom interface elements should be exposed to any assistive technology running on the user's computer or device. However, ARIA does not create the actual interaction between the user and the user's interface of the elements of the application, sorry. Next slide. How does ARIA work? ARIA works by changing and augmenting the standard DOM, D-O-M, accessible tree. Oh, I'm sorry, the accessibility tree. ARIA lets you create widget type elements that wouldn't be. Just a sec, my screen reader decided to stop talking, but I'll put it back on, sorry. It's coming on, just there he is. Okay, sorry everybody. Okay. Oh shoot, okay, here we go, sorry. Okay, I'm sorry. So ARIA lets you create widget type elements that wouldn't be with widget type elements that would not be possible with plain HTML. The ARIA attributes do not affect anything visually about the web page. The only thing that changes is the information that is exposed by the browser's accessibility APIs. This is where assistive technology like screen readers get the information from. Next slide. Now we're going to talk about the ARIA component / features. ARIA has 3 main components / features. They are roles, properties, and states. Next slide. We're going to talk about each one of these now individually. So the first one we're going to talk about is roles. Roles define what an element is or does. Many of these are so-called landmark roles, which largely duplicate the semantic value of HTML5. Structural elements, for example, role equals quote navigation quote, this is code now, less nav greater right parent. There are also others that describe different page structures, such as role equals quote banner quote, role equals quote search quote, and we'll talk about a couple of these in greater detail as we're going on in the presentation, and we can also talk about these afterward as well. And then we have role equals tab quote, etc. Next slide. Now we're going to talk about properties. This is the second one. Properties define properties of elements which can be used to give them extra meaning or semantics. For example, ARIA dash For example, ARIA dash required it equals, quote, true, quote, specifies that a form input needs to be filled in to be valid. ARIA dash labeled by equals quote, label quote, again, this is code, allows you to put an ID on an element and then reference it as being the label for anything else on that page, including multiple elements, which is not possible using the code less label for equals quote input quote greater. Again, we'll talk about these in much more detail going down with further in this presentation, but just kind of give you a highlight of what I'm talking about, or what this actually properties mean. There are specific global ARIA properties, which are, here's a complete list. We're going to go over a few of them further down in the presentation, but I just want to give you just a sense of what these are. ARIA-atomic, ARIA-controls, ARIA-described by, ARIA-drop effect, ARIA-flow to, and ARIA-has pop-up, ARIA-label, ARIA-label by, and ARIA-live, sorry, and ARIA-owns. I'm sorry, and this is the final one, is ARIA-relevant. We're not going to go through all these, we're just going to highlight a few further along in the presentation that are most commonly used. Next slide. And finally, the last feature / component is states. States are special properties that define the current conditions of elements, such as ARIA dash disabled equals quote true quote, which specifies to a screen reader that a form input is currently disabled. States differs from properties in that the properties do not change throughout the life cycle. And there are also global ARIA states as well. I'm gonna just run through these. Again, we'll talk about a few of them specifically in the presentation. There's ARIA-busy, there's ARIA-disabled, ARIA-grabbed, ARIA-hidden, we'll talk about that one for sure, and ARIA-invalid. And then next slide. Now we're going to talk about is ARIA supported. This is a difficult question to answer because of the following. There are a lot of features in the ARIA specifications. There are many combinations of operating systems, browsers, and screen readers to take into account. And certain HTML elements have restrictions on what ARIA roles and attributes that can be used on them. And this is kind of the whole premise for the title of the presentation, as you will apparently see as we continue on with the presentation. Next slide. Common ARIA attributes described is next. In this next section, we will discuss the most commonly ARIA attributes. Next slide. And so for these next ones, instead of giving, like saying ARIA dash, whatever it is, I kind of gave them corresponding titles for these slides. So this one is called landmarks. Landmarks provide information for screen reader users so they can find common page elements on the page. So for example, less nav role equals quote navigation quote. So just think of it as what you would visually consider like container holders, or containers like regions. An individual with a screen reader will hear something like navigation region, or something to that effect, about what is where you're at on the page, because as you may or may not know, somebody who doesn't have any vision will not know kind of like visually how the page sections and regions are broken up visually, maybe by color or some type of font or something like that. So that's just an example. And then we have less form equals quote search quote greater. This is again just something like to indicate if you're in like a search region where it has like a search text box and a search button as well. I know some search, I'm going to call them regions, have an option like advanced search, things like that in there. So again, it's just a way for the screen readers to protect and announce to the users of those screen readers where they are on the page. Next slide. Dynamic content updates. This is my favorite one. You'll see why in a minute. Today, it is more common for websites not to be just static text, but they tend to have a lot of dynamically updating content. For example, content that updates without the entire page reloading. This was really problematic for screen reader users. When a page refreshes, it interferes with the screen reader's cursor, typically jumping that individual back up to the top of the page. I recall, I still encounter this, but it's not as often as I had once did. But I recall, I think it was like ASPN's website, to call them out, but it would update and it would jump me to the top. And so I was trying to read a score about a football team or football game. I'm a big NFL fan. So I'll try to hurry up to try to find, the score, whatever, before it would refresh. But it was really annoying though. But ARIA has really helped with that. So Okay. ARIA provides a waiver of alerts. It's the ARIA-live property that I had talked about in the previous slide. Applying this to an element causes screen readers to read out the content that is updated. However, how urgently the content is read out or announced, it depends on the attribute's value. And here are the examples of what they are and what they mean. Off. Sorry. So this is a default in that the update should not be announced. I like this one. It says polite. Updates should only be announced if the user is idle. The other one is called assertive. Updates should be announced to the user as soon as possible. Next slide. Hiding non-essential content is what we're talking about next. The ARIA hyphen or dash hidden attributes hides the visually presented content from assistive technology from assistive technology like a screen reader. When ARIA dash hidden equals true, assistive technology, again, like a screen reader, treats the content as if it wasn't even there. So basically what that means, the screen reader will not detect it and therefore will not announce it to the screen reader user. Slide. The next example is, oh, I know, announcing missed visual text. This is really important. I know that Dane, who's also, he doesn't mind me saying, he is, he's got some vision, but not that much. He uses a screen reader also, but we found this commonly a pattern with some of our clients. So this is one that we know very well about. The ARIA hyphen, there's described by attribute is meant to provide descriptive information about the element that might be otherwise be missed. And I'm going to give you an example. So, for example, to interact with the form, the tab key, now this is for individuals who use screen readers. They are dependent on keyboards, but this is also for individuals who are dependent on keyboards due to some type of fine motor skill impairment or for some other reason. Okay, so to interact with the form, the tab key is used to move between form controls. For example, inputs, text areas, so that option, and etc. As paragraphs are not inherently keyboard focusable, meaning that you cannot use the tab key to go from paragraph to paragraph. That That's just not possible. A person using a screen reader to navigate the form would miss the password requirements if there is a form on the page where you have to log in from, what does it say? And on the page is a username when you create it and you create the password. Well, if you have the password requirements underneath the text box of either the password or confirm password or even above the actual password text box, if that individual, again, is using the tab key to get from one control, form control to the next, they're going to totally miss those password requirements and only find out once they submit the form. And then you're actually basically forcing the user to go back and have to redo their password again. The paragraph should be given a unique ID for the ARIA described by to reference. Next slide. Adding context to controls. Sometimes an interactive element like a button doesn't have a text associated with it. As a result, assistive technology, like again, screen readers would not be able to detect what the element is or what would happen when the user interacts with it. Adding ARIA labels can help you further clarify the purpose of these elements to assistive technology. Again, I'll give you an example. So, for example, a modal has an X icon as a way to close it. So they just have an X, as you all individuals who have vision probably have encountered this many times. Screen readers would announce to the user the X as just as text. So they would say X. So as a result, the user will not understand that by clicking it, that the modal will close. Adding an ARIA hyphen label of apostrophe close apostrophe would tell the assistive technology to announce the word close instead of the X. And finally, next slide, sorry. Associate text to controls. ARIA provides a way to associate text with a section, a drawing, a form element, and a picture, etc. Using the ARIA dash labeled by property, labeled by property period, I'm sorry. This idea is similar to how the quote for quote attribute is in HTML, used to link a labeled to an input control. While the function of ARIA hyphen labeled by appears similar to the native HTML label element, there are some differences, such as the ARIA hyphen labeled by can reference more than one text element. But the label that is used in HTML can only reference one. ARIA dash label by can be used for a variety of elements, but the label element can only be used on form elements. Clicking on, and finally, clicking on a label focuses the associated form field. This does not occur with ARIA hyphen label by. If this behavior is required, then you should use the HTML label or implement this functionality using scripting. And now that I've talked plenty, we're going to pass it over to Dane, who will be talking about how to use ARIA correctly. Okay, Dane, you're on.
All right. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. All right, so now we're going to talk about a few ways to use ARIA correctly and their benefits. Okay, next slide. Okay, so when developing dynamic web-based applications and services, it's important to keep in mind how your users, including users living with disabilities, will interact with and utilize the controls in the application. This is where ARIA comes in. So let's take a webmail application, for example. On the left side of the screen, there is a tree view which displays the folders in the user's email account. Across the top of the screen is a toolbar with common actions like compose, archive, new folder, forward, delete, etc. And the majority of the remaining screen real estate is taken up by the list of messages in the currently selected folder. In this case, ARIA could be used to semantically divide the screen into regions based on the areas mentioned, the folder tree view, toolbar, and the message list. Having the page divided into regions in this way helps users of assistive technologies such as screen readers navigate efficiently between the logical sections of the interface with ease. Since HTML does not do so natively, ARIA could also be used to inform assistive technologies that the list of folders is a tree view and can be expanded and collapsed to show and hide subfolders. JavaScript would then be used to create the actual interaction that occurs when the user interacts with the tree view and the rest of the page. Another example of where ARIA is useful is the case of navigation menus that could be expanded or collapsed. Specifically, ARIA can be used to inform assistive technologies of the current state of the menu. Modal windows are another case where ARIA is helpful. In particular, ARIA can be used to inform assistive technologies of the presence of the window, referred to as a dialog, along with the window's title, if any, allowing the assistive technology users to understand the results of any actions carried out on the page. Next slide. In this next section, we'll discuss a few ways in which ARIA could be used incorrectly and their drawbacks. Next slide. Along with its benefits, ARIA also has its drawbacks. For example, ARIA labels could be applied to any HTML elements, such as links, buttons, form fields, etc. However, when applied unnecessarily, such labels can internally override any information being displayed within those elements, preventing users of screen readers and speech recognition software from accessing all of the information which visually appears on the screen. For instance, a link on a page visually reads, "Show product instructions." However, the developer added an ARIA label which says, "air conditioner," thinking they were adding a hint for the user. In reality, assistive technology would read this link as simply "air conditioner" without reading the actual link text, leading to confusion and misunderstanding. This is because ARIA labels override any other labels. In the worst cases, this can lead to the inability of these users to use the site. Another drawback of ARIA is its reliance on developers to implement corresponding actions and updates for each element that uses it. For example, a website has a navigation menu which can be expanded to show the items or collapsed to make room for the main content. In this case, the developer might add the ARIA expanded attribute to their code to inform assistive technologies users of the nature of the menu, but fail to change the attribute's value from false to true after the menu expands, causing assistive technology to report that the menu is still collapsed even though it's expanded, also leading to confusion. Next slide. In some cases, content designers and developers have opted to use custom controls on websites, even where standard HTML controls such as buttons, checkboxes, drop-down menus, etc. already exist and would fit the requirements of the design. In these cases, ARIA is often used to provide accessibility support for such custom controls. Although these types of implementations may work for some users, standard HTML controls are preferred when possible. This is because custom controls often lead to the overutilization of ARIA, leaving more room for mistakes or oversights in the implementation, which may in turn leave users with certain disability types unable to efficiently use the site. For instance, someone living with a site-related disability may encounter difficulties when navigating a website if the navigation menu is reported by the user's screen reader as collapsed even though it is expanded. And a user who relies on speech recognition software to navigate due to a mobility-related disability may encounter difficulties when trying to submit a form if the submit button has an ARIA label which differs from the visually displayed label. Therefore, standard, well-supported native HTML controls should be used whenever possible. Next slide. In Suan, Europe.
Last slide Dave was talking about, we tested a tool, a database type of tool that that the developers use a lot of custom controls and implemented ARIA with them and all. Let me tell you, it was a disaster for screen reader users like me that had to do the testing on it. It was really difficult to understand what was happening in order to complete tasks. So heed that warning, like that slide says. So we're almost through. We're at the final slide. We're going to do a quick ARIA summary. Then we can take questions and talk about this particular topic after that. Although ARIA can be incredibly useful, as discussed throughout this presentation, you should be careful of when and how you use it. There, we have come up with like 5 tips or key points when to take into account when using ARIA and HTML, and here they are. 1, use semantic HTML5 in favor of ARIA. If you can use a native HTML element or attribute with the semantics and the behavior require already built in instead of repurposing an element and adding in an ARIA role, state, or property to make it accessible, then do so. As you heard us talk about in those previous slides of how you can use ARIA incorrectly. That's the reason. And you know, the main purpose of ARIA as well, if it wasn't made clear in my previous slide, was that basically ARIA is meant to cover the quote-unquote cracks of HTML5. Number 2, don't alter the meaning of the semantic elements with ARIA roles. Do not change the native semantics unless you really have to, and then still try not to do it. Number 3, interactive ARIA elements must be accessible by all mediums. All interactive ARIA controls must be usable with the keyboard. Basically, that's what number 3 is referring to. Number 4. Use appropriate roles for visible, focusable elements. Do not use, this is what basically what number 4 is referring to. Do not use role equals quote, presentation quote, or ARIA dash hidden equals true on a visible focusable element, because then they would be ignored, and you don't want that. Number 5, interactive elements must have an accessible name. All interactive elements must have an accessible name associated with what I just said. That concludes our presentation. I do want to quickly apologize for my choppiness and my notes and for the technical issues I had with my screen reader. But with that said, we can now take questions. And Andy, I don't know how you guys did this before with Zoom attendees, so I will let you handle the questions, and then Aim, I'll respond or have you respond to the question, but I'll let you know.
So, I have a question.
Yeah.
What do you mean by an accessible name for that last bit? What is an accessible name?
All right, since Aim is much more the expert than me, I will give this question to him.
Okay, all right. That's actually a really good question. So the accessible name is essentially, just to make it really simple, um, it could be really anything, any text, but it's usually the same as the visually displayed label. So if you have a button that says search on it, for example, the accessible name is going to be search, just like what is visually displayed. But the accessible name, if I had to come up with an actual definition for it, I would honestly say that it's whatever assistive technology detects as the name of the control or element that they're interacting with. And it can be set by adding the ARIA label attribute for HTML. And in different programming languages have different ways to set it. But that's beyond the scope of this. So it's just whatever assistive technology detects as the name of an element will be known as its accessible name. Does that make sense?
So like for a button, the text within the button text.
Yep.
With an attribute.
Yep.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Yep, that's exactly right. So whatever is a button, yes. If it's a button, yeah. So, and if it's like a clickable hyperlink, it would be whatever the clickable text is, or the label for a form field would be also its accessible name, assuming it's associated properly with the form field as well. Yes, that's correct.
Is that helpful?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Are there any other questions from actual people, not actual people, but for the people that are in here in person, sorry. Yeah.
I have a question.
Sure.
I've been told that I don't need to duplicate the role if you're using the semantic HTML5. For instance, the nav element doesn't need role navigation, or it might speak it twice on some technologies. I'd like kind of a definitive answer on that.
All right, Dan, I'll give you this question
Yes.
again. You give me this
Okay.
so tonight.
Oh, yep. Okay. So just to make sure that I understand the question correctly, you're wanting to know for HTML5 elements like nav, do we need the role as well?
Correct.
Okay. And the answer to that is yes. And I was just reading an article about that not too long ago, actually. The reason that we need that still is because some assistive technologies better support one method over the other one, and so it's always good to just go ahead and include both in that instance. Yes.
If I may follow up, so if you have both, AT is not going to be speaking it twice, like nav, role navigation.
I don't think so. Not to my knowledge. There could be some really odd implementations floating around somewhere of assistive technology that might do that, but not to my knowledge, no. Did anyone else have something to add?
Yes, I would like to confirm what Jane said, not to my knowledge as well, but again, as you heard in the presentation, is that, you know, ARIA is kind of not widely supported. It is getting better though, but like I said, there's so many different factors to take into account. But like Dane specified, you know, normally that does not occur, but it's, I would agree with Dane again, according to the article that he's read, to do both.
And just to add to that a little bit, the definition of an ARIA role. I mean, according to as far as we can understand it, the ARIA specification itself is that if a role is defined in ARIA, that anything that is designed to honor that, i.e. assistive technology in browsers, it's supposed to override any native semantics in the element with whatever you specify in the role. So if you did specify a role that is the same as the native semantics, like in the case of the navigation example, the nav element example, no, it really shouldn't say it twice at all.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Sure.
What screen reader do you use, Sue?
I use JAWS, and that for those who doesn't know what that means, it stands for Job Access with Speech. And AIM uses NVDA. Is that right, Dana?
Yep, that is correct.
And that stands for
Non-visual desktop access.
And how about you, Maureen?
I use JAWS, but I use Braille. With it, I do better with Braille, and like this is a Braille laptop. When I use that, it's whatever. It's not speaking. It's not JAWS. It's not NVDA. It's.
But other than JAWS, you use the JAWS application to access all your information in Braille, right?
Not when I'm on the laptop.
Okay.
It's strictly Braille. When I'm on my desktop, I use JAWS, but I also use a handy-tech Braille display.
Okay.
To help, like, just the way that I think and the way that I work. For example, if I'm listening to a phone number or something, it's easier for me to read it in Braille and catch what it is. If I'm gonna, I work in sales here at WECO, and so if I'm gonna call a customer and I need their email address, I need to write it down, or their phone number, it's easier for me to read it in Braille and then get it that way.
Okay, thank you.
There's also to be complete, if they're using a Macintosh, they'll be using VoiceOver. If they're using iOS mobile devices, they will also be using VoiceOver. If they're Android, they'll be using TalkBack.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just like depending on your platform and your devices, you're going to have different screen readers as a problem.
But do you have time to test them all, or do you just?
Because so where I work, we call them BRAS. For browser AT combinations, and there's usually what you have to do is you're going to have to be very selective on how much you're going to test in different situations. Typically, we will test with one or two BRAS, usually the most common ones based upon the WebAIM surveys, which tend to give you JAWS and IE11, and then NVDA and Firefox to try getting basic coverage. And those usually give you, my preference is usually NVDA Firefox because I like the tools I can use under NVDA. I like NVDA because as a sighted user, I get the text viewer, which is really helpful to get the exact transcripts to tell developers, yes, it's saying this, or that's, or sometimes you may see it on there, but if you listen, it's not actually saying what you saw. The other is I get better tools and extensions on Firefox than I do on IE11. Those tend to be my preferences, but again, it's going to be what works well. If you're using a Mac, VoiceOver also has a text window, so you can see what it's announcing. But those usually you want to use to identify the common issues. Then you do the exhaustive BRAT testing, and that would go beyond screen readers. I've been on a project where we did 13 BRATs across Mac, and it was all desktop, Mac and Windows. Not only did we have screen readers, including Window Eyes at the time, but we also did Zoom Text, Magic, Dragon Naturally Speaking, and other assistive technologies, which also can come into play here. Because the question about accessible names, that's one of the new WCAG 2.1 success criteria, where what you see says send, but underneath they put an ARIA label that says mail or something like that. Those are things for it to be thorough and complete, you want to test. But as a practical matter, there's a limit. Because BRATs also vary with versions of browsers and versions of assistive technology. So you have all the problems historically found on web since the browsers were first written, but the browsers evolve, they have different characteristics. Same for JAWS, same for NVDA, same for all the other tools. Some have bugs, some don't, some introduce them, some fix them. Some work better with other assistive technology. Some work differently with the kinds of errors you might find in your HTML. So there's a lot of things that can go wrong, but generally sticking to the most common ones, JAWS and NVDA on Windows platforms, VoiceOver on Mac. And if you're doing mobile, again, it's going to be, it's going to typically be VoiceOver because that tends to iOS devices tend to be more popular. But TalkBack is getting more popular. And then, as we've had in previous news, like other technologies like voice recognition systems, like Alexa, Google Home, things like that.
Yeah, right.
Those all come into play as well.
But and then if it's updated, it makes a difference. I mean, I've seen like getting an updated JAWS model. Some things are different, and sometimes things that were before don't, and sometimes things that do or didn't before work. And I've also seen it different with different browsers. I remember going to a page once that would not do anything in IE11 with JAWS. There was like nothing on that website that would work. And then I switched to Firefox with JAWS, and all of a sudden it was reading the website fine. So,
and just when, thank you all for who contributed to answer that question. But just one last thing I would like to point out is that just because you have tested on the most updated / version of a assistive technology product doesn't mean users all have that. You will find that, and Maureen can attest to this, I think, but not all individuals who have screen readers or sometimes assistive technology have the latest version, due to their preference, or this is what they can afford at this time. So there's a lot of things to take into account.
Okay, thank you. And then could I have your name, sir?
Bill Tyler.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Yes.
Is there any preference one way or the other between using ARIA labeled versus HTML text that's been styled to be invisible to the sighted user but accessible to screen readers?
Okay, and I'm going to let you take this question because I know you can respond to this well.
Okay, so for screen reader users alone, I would say that it really doesn't matter so much. Now, that's just for screen readers. If we're looking at the whole picture, the preference that we tend to say is to, wherever possible, actually go ahead and have visible labels, because not having visible labels can sometimes make it difficult for users of speech recognition software to dictate to their software which control to click on, because they're not visually labeled. And so it might be difficult for them to know, okay, which form field do I need to tell my software to click in so I can type, kind of thing, or however they're going to do it. But that would be my answer to that question. But if you are really, really needing to have, for some reason, labels that are invisible, like describe, I would say that use a label element with a for attribute that's properly associated, referencing the idea of, say, the text field, for example, and then style that with the CSS class to be floated off screen, but not using display none or visibility hidden, because those also remove it from screen readers. Does that answer your question?
Yep.
The only thing I would add to that is you tend to want to use things like labels. The first rule of ARIA is to not use ARIA unless you have to. Labels have much broader support across more assistive technologies, so you can have fewer issues. ARIA was already common, and ARIA can be inconsistently implemented, and you're relying on a lot of things in the BRAC complex. Does the browser support it? Does the assistive technology support it? Does the combination support it? And so label having been around for over 20 some years, that will probably work better by hiding in CSS. And it's going to be a secondary issue as opposed to making sure that it actually has that relationship. And I also would say is like, making sure that you have visible labels, not using placeholders in text fields as your label. These are all things that are just good usability and accessibility, and they're really helpful for those who are sighted and using voice recognition systems.
I think that's really good, and thank you. And I would also just like to add, if there's an HTML5 element that already exists, use it. Just like we had been mentioning this whole time. I want to pause right here for the people that are here in person. I just want to give the individuals on Zoom an opportunity to ask any questions. Is there any questions? That? Okay, so if anybody has a question on Zoom, please type in your question. If not, does anybody else in the room here have any other questions?
I had a question about something earlier on in the presentation. I'm a UX designer, so I don't know code stuff. There was a thing where you mentioned DOM standards, I think.
Yes.
What is that?
Okay, Dane, you're on again.
Okay. DOM is Document Object Model, and that is what is generated by the web browser and communicated through the API, which stands for Application Programming Interface, and that is what the assistive technology picks up. And it's simply a term that is used, it's a name for that, and that's just called the DOM, or the Document Object Model.
Okay, thanks.
I have kind of a bigger question about like, there's been like a explosion of what's called JavaScript front-end frameworks in the last couple of years. And I'm really curious, like from your testing and stuff, has that made accessibility worse because of like a huge layering of ARIA all over these applications to explain what's happening instead of like a full page refresh?
So I'll speak, and then Dane, and then anybody else can respond that after I get done. I know that we've had issues with that, in that, Dane, you can respond after me, but where we really have to check the code to see if it's a screen reader issue or specific screen reader quirk or heuristic or something like that. And it's really time consuming to try to determine what the issue is because of that. Dane, would you like to say anything else about that?
Yeah, I concur with what Sue Ann just said, but I'll also add that it really depends, because a lot of times we've found that when we've done testing, for instance, we've been able to communicate some of the issues to the people we've done testing for, and we've seen results. And so the JavaScript frameworks are great. They have their place. In and of themselves, it's really kind of a mixed a mixed bag, so to speak, because it just depends on how they're used. Just like any tool, they can be used for, enhancing accessibility, or sometimes, they can cause issues. But it's kind of hard to say for sure, absolutely one way or the other. I think it just depends a lot on developer awareness of accessibility and the standards and so on. But yeah, that would be my 2 cents for that one.
Thank you.
I think you also have to start by, when you're evaluating the framework of choice, and what do they do for accessibility to begin with, because newer ones tend to be very weak on that. More established ones may already have an accessibility program to include that. They may have good design patterns that will support that in other ways that will be built in. Because yes, you can take pure JavaScript or an existing framework and make it accessible, but the amount of work and how much is done for you can vary greatly depending on your choice. So when you're evaluating, it should be one of the items that's done, because you will be beholden to your platform of choice, whether it's Angular or it's Material or some other party, whatever your choice is, whether it's an old one or it's cutting edge.
Any other question?
Yeah, I have a question.
Sure.
I forget your name.
Bill.
Bill. You mentioned that there's kind of fraught issues with this assistive technology and browser and the combination and updating. Is there a assistive technology community, like a subreddit or something, where you can kind of go and see, like,
I'm not the right person to ask.
This is-
I said I do it as part of my work, but I think those who live it may have better answers
Yeah.
about how they follow these things.
my question is there a place where people using these technologies are saying, actually don't update, because I did and it's horrible. And so, like, to conform to the past standard or something, if there's a bug that needs to be worked out.
I will respond first, and then Dane, you can go ahead. There are different forums out there. Now, again, those individuals may not be a representative of, common or a group of people. Again, it's all due to an individual's preference, how they use their assistive technology, what their experience level is. So there are community forums out there, and you could, perhaps, if you desire, encounter about those, but I wouldn't take those in my own personal opinion, and you can comment on this after I'm done, but I wouldn't, take that to be all end all if you hear it from, one or two or three or four or five people. Dane, any thoughts?
Yeah. I would agree with that. There are some, I don't know if I'm able to mention some by name here, but they, like Sue Ann said, there are some out there, and honestly, if you're looking for some to join or to look at posts on or something, I wouldn't be afraid to just honestly search for it on a search engine like Google or whatever your favorite search engine is. Look for it and see if you can find some. But and I don't know about all the disability communities. I do know that there's a lot of things on social media like Twitter and Facebook as well, just users talking about things, and just it's everywhere and nowhere at the same time. Like Sue Ann said, everyone has different experiences and different experience levels with even the same assistive technology. And for example, I'll use my own disability type as to illustrate. My visual impairment is the visual impairment that I have, and another person with visual impairment might use a completely different type of screen reader or have a different way of using it. So it varies so widely that, like Sue Ann said, I'd have to agree. I don't think you could just take it as a, be all end all, but just kind of as a general point to maybe consider, or, just use it as a general guideline, or just something to kind of help you decide, whatever you're needing to do. But I wouldn't put too much into it, honestly.
Thank you, Dane and Sue Ann.
I have a question. In the presentation at the beginning, there was kind of definitions of roads, property, estates, and that kind of thing. I was just wondering if there's a good visual for what what those look like, or like a good YouTube video to reference like what that would actually be in practice?
I know that the W3C's Schools website has a good tutorial on ARIA. Dane and Bill, if you two would like to share some other resources that you think might be helpful to the rest of the team, listen to me, to everybody in attendance, sorry. How about you, Dane? We'll start with you first.
Okay. I'm honestly not too sure, at least as far as exactly what you might be looking for. I do know there are plenty of articles and the like about it online in various places. They're actually pretty easy to find. I don't know about any specifics though. As far as like a visual chart, I'm not aware of any off the top of my head right now. I'd have to investigate it, but yeah.
Well, really quick, Bill, and then I'll let you have it.
I said, the fact is I don't really have a good answer. I'm trying to Google it myself.
Oh, okay.
That's the case where it's like, when it comes to it, it's that, you know, the name, role, value, landmarks, it's like they tend to be more like, you know, it's like you get landmarks with roles, and then it tends to be, you know, just lean more on illustrations you see for HTML5 landmarks, because those tend to cover most of them.
Mm-hmm.
It says like the roles, then you get presentation, so I stay on. Yeah, properties, since they tend to be, you know, they tend to be very specific in what implementation is, and states, you know, they're dynamic. You know, so the problem tends to, you know, I've always been approaching them as what's needed in a particular situation. I mean, again, ARIA should be when you need that, you know, use ARIA when you need to, because something's, you know, you're doing something new that isn't out of the box. And then it's a matter of making sure that it is as standardized as possible. So if you're, you know, if you're trying to create a breadcrumb trail, you can put that inside a nav tag and, you know, have an ARIA label saying that I'm breadcrumbs, instead opposed to being, say, top navigation or footer navigation and things like that. I don't know, okay, visually, it's like YouTube videos, don't know of any.
So really quick, I was doing research on this topic to assist with my part of the presentation. I did not watch any, but I know that when I was doing research, there was a lot of YouTube videos that appeared in the search results. So does anybody have any other resources?
Yeah.
Oh, perfect. Great.
I would recommend checking out the W3C's WAI website. That would be the, oh gosh, W3C's Web Accessibility Initiative. They just did a website redesign, and it's super fabulous. It does link to some of the actual documentation on it, and that can seem overwhelming, but it does have like visual, this is the code, and explains all of it.
Okay, yeah, just it's like hard to learn. Like, what does this mean with all the little brackets and stuff? I'm like, what does it look like? So, yeah.
I find a lot of the like
That's a good one.
browser tools kind of helpful sometimes. Like some of them aren't completely accurate. Like your question earlier is something that Google Lighthouse in Chrome recommends to do, to not use roles if you use proper HTML5 elements. But those tools like Google Chrome Lighthouse, there's another one by Axe. It's called Axe. It's a Chrome extension. It'll kind of scroll your page and try to pick out problems that you have with ARIA roles and stuff. And those actually teach you a lot about like what you should be using, point out common mistakes. They're not always completely accurate, but I think you'll learn quite a bit just by running through.
That's AXE.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's a Chrome extension by DQ Systems. And then in terms of like a visual presentation, there's been a lot of like conference talks about it lately. Somebody to look up is Marcy Sutton, does a lot of really great accessibility talks. She works for Gatsby now, but actually developed the Axe plugin for Chrome.
Oh.
One other tool, if we're talking about tools, is Site Improve. They allow you to use their engine on single pages for free. And I thought I was doing pretty well when I was testing with Wave and Axe until I got to Site Improve, and they totally slammed me. I was like, oh my gosh, well, I guess I got work to do. So it's useful.
Yeah, like sites, like a website or.
SITE, yeah.
And so just one thing I have to caution is when using those automated tools, like we've mentioned before, they're not 100% accurate and they have false positives. So just be really careful of those. We certainly use them. It will get you a good starting point, but just want to remind everybody about that though.
And as a good example is that one of the more recent lawsuits in the last year, GNC, General Nutrition Centers, I believe, lost a lawsuit because they let their developer say, use, I believe, I'm trying to remember, Site Improvement Sort Site or something, one of those automated tools, and said, went out there with no background accessibility, went and claimed their site was accessible and lost the suit because they didn't have an accessibility professional actually is doing it, and they just relied solely on automated testing and did not win when they had their day in court. So again, the usual rule of thumb with automated testing tools is they can get you 20 to 30% of the way, but it's like they can do simple things that are really more like code validation, like image tag does not have an alt attribute. That's easy. What's supposed to be in that alt attribute? It may not have a good clue at all, especially if the alt is above pie chart or it is above the photograph. It will not do that. And your AI tools that will say, this is a picture of somebody, it may not be able to identify who that person is, even if it's one of the most famous people in the world. And again, that's automated tools can only take you so far.
True.
Why we want to use Weco.
That's right. Thank you for that.
Send you my address.
Anybody on Zoom have any questions? I don't want to leave anybody who's on Zoom out. So please, type in if you have any questions.
I haven't seen any questions yet.
Okay,
the Zoomers are disappearing.
Okay, I just want to make sure that I don't leave anybody who's on Zoom out. Any other questions? It's about 7:20. Any other questions in general about accessibility that you have questions about that we could possibly help you with, or more on this topic?
I had one. So you mentioned it in terms of personnel a little bit. So what sort of qualifications when you're looking to work with a company that does web assessment, what are some of those professional credentials that people should look for?
Well,
certifications.
Anyone in the room certified? I'm not.
Okay.
We really advocate, because we consider ourselves as experts, not only because of our knowledge and our experience, but we are actually people that live with our disabilities every single day. And using assistive technology is part of us. So our thought process, our problem solving skills, our patience, our creativity, ability to be flexible, to adapt, is not going to be the same experience as you get. No offense to anybody here who's not disabled, who uses assistive technology for testing, but you just will not get that same kind of experience if you have a person who's not disabled using an assistive technology software or hardware product. Does that answer your
Yeah, that's
question?
great. So not to ask too much about Weco, but
That's
so
okay.
is it a combination then? You use some validation and then some human testing, a
Yes.
combination?
It's both.
Yeah.
It's both. And to just accent on Sue Ann's answer is we really notice when customers come to us and sometimes they talk about they've tried different things, or we look at what some people say that, you know, they can do accessibility, dig in a little deeper and find out either that they're testing by device, that it's a bunch of, say, sighted people that have learned JAWS really well, or they only have, a lot of people have some blind people on their staff testing, but they don't test for the other disabilities. And that's what we go is really, really different than other places that we test using people with all four of the disabilities.
I would like to add really quick, Maureen, thank you. So for example, we also test, like Maureen just said, for the 4 disability groups. But with that said, we're not device specific, we're disability group specific. So for example, a cognitive user who has a disability like ADD or ADHD or dyslexia may or may not use an assistive device, software or product, hardware product.
Yeah.
So we base that on the actual the disability user groups.
Right. And that's a tougher area, right? The cognitive, because there's so much variation among
Yes.
folks who might be report or self.
We have some autistic testers, which that falls into cognitive, but so does someone with a traumatic brain injury.
Yeah.
Or someone with onset of, you know, early dementia.
Mm-hmm.
Or someone with intellectual disability. All fits,
Yeah.
and mental illness all fits into cognitive. So, you know, people don't think about web access and mental illness, but if somebody, say, is, you know, struggling with a website refreshing, or just because it's not very intuitive or hard to understand, and they have a panic problem, so then that causes more anxiety. So, you know, things like that. There's a lot of things that can go into the cognitive arm of the disability.
Thank you.
I should add some other things. It's like that. I tend to agree with them about, in general, about accessibility, but there are there's the IAAP, the International Association of Accessibility Professionals. They do have a certification process. They seem to be the major one.
Yes.
They have several. They have one that's just general accessibility. Then there's also WAS, which I think is web application or web accessibility specialist.
Yes.
Those are the ones that you're going to find. Those folks will have taken the test. They will be certified. That's good. At least they will have done some. Yeah, they've done some study. But experience is going to be another big part of it, because we've grown our practice at Optum from, let's see, over 5 years ago, there were 2 of us. Now we're about 39.
Wow.
Including people with a variety of disabilities, and we're international and all that. But the reality is that, you know, when it comes to hiring people, you know, experience is what you're going to be looking for. And it's like being open to, especially those who've got, you know, first-hand experience, you know, because they live it, you know, not one way or another is one of the best ways. But also, it's just somebody who's just, you know, gotten a certification does not make them an expert in it. You're going to be, you know, be careful.
Yeah. Thank you.
I think that's a really good point, Bill. Thank you.
Great. Thanks.
Any other last minute questions? We can continue on till 7:40, and then I got to go. All right. Is there any other questions though? Anyone from Zoom? This is your last chance.
Well, you know, I did have one other question.
Sure.
So I do a lot with CRMs, you know, constituent relationship management, Salesforce and others. And is there a way when you're looking at software other than from the front end of the website, but to see what efforts they've made towards compliance? I think there's a documentation protocol where they spell out where they're in compliance and where they're not. Are folks familiar with that?
Yeah.
What is that called again?
The
I think
VPAT.
Well,
you mentioned it
I want to
before.
let the host answer. They're even more expert than I am. But it's like my quick answer said first. Usually, if they're doing accessibility, look at the footer, see if they have an accessibility statement. That's your first giveaway. Second, the term you're trying to find is VPAT.
That's it.
The VPAT, voluntary. Let's see, voluntary. It's accessibility term, voluntary product accessibility.
There you go.
That's it, right.
Having had to write a few in the last couple of months, so it's like I'm wanting to forget about it. That is the more explicit way, but that's really just for its value is for RFPs when you're trying to get in there, especially for government and university things like that.
Okay.
Now for the experts.
Oh, hey, would you like to take this question as well?
All right,
There
I
is
can
a chat. Lynn jumps in and says, keep in mind that accessibility statements aren't always accurate.
That's true.
Remember the GNC story. They thought they had done it, but they did not have anybody with real expertise doing it. So,
I've also been on some websites where they have their accessibility policy really easy to find on their homepage, and you go there, and then it says, contact us with your accessibility questions, but there's no contact form or way to get a hold of them.
Are you usually looking there for a policy or statement about their approach, or just contact information?
Both, just see what there is, and there should be some way to contact, somebody.
Yeah.
If you need
Understood.
something.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, thank you all.
Lynn even goes further, says lots of sites and software out there claim to be accessible that aren't. Some folks think that it will save them to simply state that and do not do the words.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
For Lynn. That's for Lynn. That's Lynn speaking for. I'm speaking for.
Thank you for reading that since Andy's helping Maureen downstairs. I appreciate that. Thank you to Lynn as well. I'm sorry.
I did one more just question. So I applied for a job that's a digital accessibility specialist. And I don't know what specialist means, and I'm doing air quotes. What does that exactly mean?
About as much as anything else. It's
Right.
what digital accessibility is. It's going to be whatever your terminology. Having done usability for 3 decades, it's like I watched the terminology of that role change to where it is. Specialist, engineer, whatever. It's usually just the noun they use to put on it. The digital accessibility is going to say that you're going to be doing online tools, software applications. You're not going to be dealing with trying to make printing braille labels or trying to deal with accessible, loading docks and things like that. Then the part after that, the expectation is that you're going to, in this day and age when we hire people, we tend to have them as an engineering role, but they would tend to be things that we're looking for people with experience and knowledge of WCAG, 2120. They have experience with assistive technology, all the things about ARIA, and then we interview and find out how well they do know those things.
I would totally agree with that. And I don't know if you're referring to what I would do is read the job description and all those requirements that they ask. That would tell you exactly.
Yeah, but I mean, sometimes there's specialists could just mean anything.
The part is it's just like a lot of things in software and the web, the names, it's like it could be accessibility guru. It could be, it doesn't matter how hip or trendy or whatever they're doing, they really do want to look at the actual description of what they're looking for requirements. The titles. The only other part about it is that I recently got moved up, so I'm a principal from being senior, jumped over lead and those sorts of things. May give you a sense of how much experience, but that's going to usually be shown up in the job description. Like you have 5 years, you have 10 years, you have, we'll take you without any experience, that sort of thing.
It also really depends on whether or not the job description includes programmer coding at any time.
Yeah.
The design position, that's kind of a different set.
Yeah, it's a UX team.
So if it's not involving the actual working with code, or it's just only design, then you're looking at more, contract requirements and things like that. And design of the page.
So what I would recommend is, doesn't matter what the title of the position is, read that job description and the qualifications, because the title may or may not be the same across the board.
Oh, Lynn wants to say, we wanted to call our accessibility folks rock stars, but that wasn't a recognized title.
Well, thank you. But, are there any other questions before we adjourn this meetup?
I would just like to connect with the person on, is it Dane?
Yes.
On like LinkedIn or whatever, is that, or like, I don't know how to
Or-
connect with people on like LinkedIn or
So
Twitter. Or
to ask more questions or, okay, just contact Lynn if you have other questions, and then she'll get you in touch with Kane from there.
Cool.
One thing I would say, since it's still out in the future, is that, you know, in May, let's see, I'm trying to remember which day, I have to look at the calendar, but Global Accessibility Awareness Day is coming up. And that's going to be some big events, and then often we're actually going to, oh, look who, my body's arrived. The voice. Say Global Accessibility Awareness Day is coming up, so you want to pay attention to all the events. We'll be hosting some, but it's going to be invitation only. As a case where it's like the people I know that come here probably want to go to other things. So as by Lynn, Suzanne, or others, it's like they may not want to be trapped out in the prairie.
We will be doing one here on May 16th, and it's an
May 16th,
after work event, and we're actually going to be looking for sponsors this year. If your organization, and it's a low bar level, you want to sponsor a demo or something like that to help defray the cost. Andy is actually going to be calling people for sponsorships, but we're going to just be doing it here after work, and we're going to be doing screen readers, speech recognition software, Braille, everything.
Voiceover. So.
Yeah, because actually we're flying in. Dane is going to be here physically, and Jen, our new specialist from California, is going to be here. So we're going to have a whole crew, and it's free. Just come have dinner, look at devices, bring your crew in, because you get to actually see devices working. So we'll get you the save the date stuff out soon. Thanks, Bill.
Okay, everybody, thank you so much for coming, attending this meetup in person and also in Zoom. I hope that you all enjoyed the presentation and hope you found it helpful. So to everybody on Zoom, thank you again for joining. Have a great rest of your week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody here for attending.
You're
welcome.
Unfortunately, I haven't been sent over right with
I could use it.
we got some
Yeah. No? Okay. You look familiar. I thought we worked together or something. It's okay.
Thank you very much.
Got it all filled in now.
Really marking that up.
Yeah, that's right.
It's looking good.
Now it'll get all over me when I walk out.
The difference is that you know, my presentations that unlike disability, accessibility.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, like too, I was doing, and just sitting there.
It is more demand. UX usability is far more common these days, and everybody's doing it. Usability, accessibility is just got huge demand. Problem is, what we find is so it is a lot easier for us to find people because we
How
have
about this
possibilities
worldwide
against others.
Well,
But
what
as
are
a skill set,
you?
whether you're a developer,
you?
designer, or even a content author, it is a skill to have. It is one that is going to be increasing in the market with a great increase in accessibility.
No.
Just the demands.
If you have already signed up for me to
Like I'm
you'll
trying to learn.
receive one.
So we have
Don't take too much.
No, I know.
But
I
the
know.
thing is that
I'm
there's,
just looking for jobs in general in UX.
yeah,
so-
the part about it is, don't lie about your
Oh, yes,
experience.
yes.
Try building
Okay,
it
she'll
up and,
advertise that for sure.
getting it, if you could fit it into any
Yeah.
position. I learned accessibility while I was at Blue Cross in 2002 in a serious way. But that was, I was also doing
Yeah,
UX
you
and
can
development.
get me
It
to the
was a lot
hallway and I
easier
can get
that
to the
way.
office by
But
myself.
ultimately, the resources are out there. You know, you said W3 schools, others have got them. They're searching.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. Did I hear you say you're at Optum?
Yes.
That's great. Yeah, I'm trying to get interviews with Optum right now. So.
Yes, but the case is that could be any number of places. Unless you said accessibility, then I probably.